This is Peter Mullins here for another edition of Fora. Really excited to have Nipul Chokshi here, who is the VP of Marketing at Atrium and who I've known for many years from way back at Lattice Engines. So Nipul, it's great to see you again and great to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, great to be on, Peter, and great to be chatting again.
Excellent. Well, if you don't mind, can you maybe just give our listeners a bit of a rundown on your CV? You know, where how you've come up through marketing and the experiences you've had.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So currently, I run our marketing efforts at a company called Atrium. So we have a SaaS platform that helps B2B sales managers use data to improve team performance. Our point of view is for anybody familiar with Moneyball, the movie or the book, how the Oakland A's and baseball teams, sports teams in general, started to think differently about how they can use data to field the right players, to coach them, and so on and so forth. That same concept we're bringing to the B2B sales market, where sales managers need to be empowered with the right data. Unfortunately, all they're equipped with today are walls of charts that they get through CRM and BI dashboards. And we just want to make it easy for those managers to be able to consume the data that they need to be able to identify who to coach, what to coach them on, how to develop someone, and to just become more data driven.
Right.
So that's my current position. We're a really early stage startup. We just announced seed funding a few months back. Prior to Atrium, I was in marketing roles at a variety of different companies. I was at Dun & Bradstreet, where I was head of our portfolio marketing efforts for Dun & Bradstreet. I came into Dun & Bradstreet through an acquisition of my last company, Lattice Engines, where I was CMO, head of marketing there for several years, where we, I had the good fortune to have a front seat to creating a category around B2B customer data platforms. Prior to Lattice, I was at Yammer, where I joined Yammer, and I was fortunate to be on a really crazy ride there, right up to through the acquisition of Microsoft by Microsoft.
Yep.
Prior to that, did some product marketing work at Marketo. Prior to that, was a product manager at Siebel Systems. Prior to that was an engineer. So I grew up as an engineer, moved into product, and then ultimately moved into a marketing sort of role.
Right.
And that's really helped me, I believe, from a marketing standpoint, enabled me to, become very data-driven, if you will, and that served me well in my marketing roles.
That's terrific. Well, I appreciate that very much.
Yeah.
So one of the things that's really interesting, and I know when we first started talking back in the Lattice days, one of the things that I found most interesting was around the data-driven approach, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how do you, now that you're selling to sales management, do you feel like that's changed over time, that sales's willingness to use data to inform, where they focus? Has that, have you seen more adoption of that recently?
Yeah, look, that's definitely something where sales managers are looking to use data on an ongoing basis to figure out, what the best way is to kind of manage their teams. And a lot of it is, I think, just cultural. Like, in our personal lives, we are all instrumented to the hilt with things like the Apple Watch,
Sure.
Fitbit devices, and all these sorts of things where we're trying to, measure everything from calories to number of hours slept to number of calories burned and so on and so forth, right? And so just that kind of mentality, we've seen sales managers try to apply that to the sales management profession. Now, traditionally, most sales managers, they've moved up the ranks because they've traditionally been the best individual contributor. They've been the best sales rep in the field, right?
Right.
And so what we've observed in our customer base is managers generally don't have the right tools or the training that they need to be very effective when it comes to really coaching, developing, onboarding, ramping, and generally getting the most out of the reps on their teams. The one-on-ones that most managers will have, it'll be all about, hey, tell me about the latest deal. Is it going to close? Is it not? And while that's important, it's also important to talk about some of the leading indicators and some of the leading actions that got you to a place where a deal might be stuck, for example, right? For example, did you multi-thread across in the account in order to make sure that you've kind of syndicated yourself appropriately in a particular deal? And so we've definitely seen kind of this desire among sales managers to leverage data to be smarter and more effective when it comes to helping their reps succeed. And that's just definitely grown over time. And the thing that's really changed in my mind is all the data that reps are generating, right? You've got calendar systems that have information about the meetings that they're having with customers and prospects, obviously email interactions. You've got tools like Gong and Chorus that are recording calls and whatnot. So it was just a matter of time before someone came in, someone like Atrium, right? And actually just kind of took all the data from all these different sources and made it so that you can actually, kind of sew them into a story that a sales manager can use to be able to understand, how their reps are actually doing on a day-to-day basis.
Right. So that makes a lot of sense. But now you said about, sales management often come from being, a great individual contributor, and then they've risen up through the ranks. So some of those folks might not be as comfortable or familiar with data and leveraging data. So how do you know where too much data is too much, or do you, for those folks that aren't quite as data centric, how do you ease them into a world where data is at the core?
Well, yeah, that's the whole trick, though, right? Like I said, like people are, sales managers are thirsting for the data they need to be able to manage their reps more effectively. And what winds up happening is that companies will, respond to that request by basically, sales operations teams, revenue operations teams, generally taking dashboards, building dashboards in CRM. Right. Or taking a tool like Tableau or Looker or whatnot and building a whole bunch of dashboards, right? The problem is that these are just, it's really hard as a regular person, if you will, to be able to often make heads or tails of these dashboards, right? So now while the dashboards and reports and all these things that you get out of CRM, Tableau, Looker are really good at telling you, how close a rep is to making their quota, but they're really bad at enabling you to highlight trends or anomalies in performance that results in, that particular rep being able to make his or her number. Right. And so that's been the challenge is, when it comes to the data, it's really making sure that you're kind of presenting it in a way that's very usable for the sales managers, right? And that's been the thing that hasn't necessarily been solved. And that's what we believe is like a big need in the market. And that's what we're trying to fill, obviously, from an Atrium standpoint. Is to enable that data-driven sales management by bringing the data to the masses, if you will.
Right. Well, it makes sense. I mean, considering what you were doing at Lattice, right, where taking data and taking huge volumes of data points about opportunities and what's happening in the market and consolidating that into a prediction of and where to focus, right? And so marketers been swimming there for a while.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we were kind of doing, so it's kind of the flip sides of the same coin, if you will. Whereas in the MarTech industry, for B2B, B2B marketers have been swimming in data for the last like 10 years. And what Lattice sought to do was just kind of sew that data together, stitch it together, and make it so that it made sense for the marketer. That's kind of what we're doing for the sales manager.
Right. Yeah. No, that's perfect timing. So now let's take it back to thinking about you and how you're approaching your leadership of marketing. So how do you take the data that you're swimming in right now and
Yeah.
use that to do Moneyball for your own kind of initiatives and strategies? Like
Yeah.
where do you start?
Yeah, so I mean, so there's really two pieces to my role here in marketing. So marketing, my I also own our sales development function as
Right.
well.
Yeah.
And so there, I'm actually using our own product to
Yeah.
be able to, measure and map and identify all the leading indicators for our reps. Because ultimately, I'm held accountable to a pipeline objective, number of opportunities, as well as a dollar pipeline objective.
Right.
And so for the sales development folks, what I'll do is I'll look at leading indicators leading up to that, in terms of number of emails sent, number of accounts touched, on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, right? The engagement rates,
Right.
that we get, the conversion rate of a meeting to an opportunity, conversion rate of an opportunity into a sales accepted opportunity. So I'll kind of use our own tools and technologies to measure those leading indicators on the sales development side.
Right.
Um, I also, from a marketing standpoint, am responsible for kind of our awareness and branding and whatnot. That again is very much from a business standpoint, kind of a leading indicator, if you will, for business that's to come several quarters down the line. And so there, similar to what I did at Lattice, we're taking very much a kind of an approach where we're measuring things like account engagement. We're looking at, how, based on the number of accounts in our target market, what portion of the account, what portion of that have we engaged, and is that engagement number improving across the different channels, whether it's our web, whether it's our email, and so on and so forth.
Great. Now, you mentioned about awareness and leading indicators there.
Mhm.
It's always a notoriously difficult one
Yeah.
to measure, right? What are you looking at there? Are you looking at visibility trends, SEO coverage, or how do you think about the numbers there?
Yeah, so there are a variety of different things that I'll generally look at, but in terms of reporting on, are more people aware of the Atrium brand, for example, just kind of brand awareness, if you will. Um, I'm doing something just as simple as basically looking at the organic traffic that's coming to my website,
Yeah.
right? The number of branded searches that are actually being conducted on Google, right? And so those are just two really quick and dirty metrics that I'm using currently. In the past, when I've been at larger companies like D&B, for example, we would do brand studies, right? That would enable us to get a better sense of and to survey using agencies to be able to get a better sense of, what kind of recall and all those sorts of things. But we're pretty scrappy.
Right. Right.
And so I'm just resorting to, kind of those simple metrics like, number of, website visitors, is it growing over time?
Right.
Specifically website visitors coming to us organically, as well as the branded searches that we're seeing.
Got it. Okay, great. Now, I just had written a blog post last week on the ultimate mission of marketing, increase companies' valuation, and that to me sort of crystallized what marketing's goal is, because it's both that brand awareness that you're talking about
Hmm.
and the owning the right market, and it's also the demand generation, revenue generation, etc.
Yep.
And you had cited increased company valuation on the forum questionnaire as being your top goal.
Yeah.
I'm just curious because I'm thinking back to like Lattice, and if I'm not mistaken, I mean D&B bought Lattice as a strategic buy, right, as a roll
Hmm.
in. So in the lead up to that, if you're comfortable, I'd be really curious to how you thought about establishing Lattice as that strategic buy that someone of the caliber of Dun and Bradstreet would want to pick up.
Yeah, I mean, look, ultimately, it's not like we, everything that we did from a go-to-market standpoint wasn't in service of getting acquired, right?
Right.
It
Right.
was really in service of, hey, let's increase the valuation. Let's make sure that, our investors are getting their money's worth, if not
Yeah.
more, right?
Yeah.
As any venture-backed company will do. And so the way we kind of thought about that was, how do we, we had a decision to make in terms of whether we kind of go into one market that was already existing, but had a lot of players where we didn't really have a lot of flexibility in terms of defining the criteria for what the winner would look like in that market. And because it'd been established, and again, there were just other people in there that were spending a ton more money from a marketing and sales standpoint, bigger players, or the opportunity was there for us to kind of establish a new market or new category, if you will. We kind of looked around, thought about it a little bit, and we just felt like, okay, it makes sense to kind of embark on this new category. Now, we didn't take that lightly. Category creation is not for the faint of heart, and it requires a ton of money. And so what we did was we kind of cheated a little bit and kind of said, okay, let's look at this market called the customer data platform market that had already been in existence for about a decade now in the B2C space. So people already kind of had an inkling of what it was. And so what we did was we kind of said, okay, let's kind of turn that a little bit to the side and say, okay, there's this B2B customer data platform market. And establish our presence there, and our ability to win there. And again, though, our point of view was, customer data platforms, they had existed forever, but what had not existed was a customer data platform made specifically for B2B companies, where you needed to be able to account for things like long sales cycles. You needed to be able to account for the fact that a sales team was absolutely critical part of any sort of go-to-market motion, right? So being able to distribute data to sales reps in CRM, like no B2C CDP ever really considered that as a key requirement, right? And so, we looked at a lot of the things that we did really well, and we're able to kind of say, okay, let's fashion this market. And then we just kind of good old-fashioned category creation, right? I got as many customers talking about it as much as possible over the span of like 3 years. I did like 40 webinars, maybe. Every single, trade show that we went to, it wasn't a Lattice person talking. There'd always be a customer speaking, so the idea is that we wanted to make sure that there was this groundswell around the category that was being brought about by customers, not just the vendor, right? At the same time, we also started engaging analysts, and kind of we worked really closely with Gartner, Forrester, and it paid off. Forrester wound up writing a separate, B2B customer data platform wave in 2017 or 2018. Gartner did a kind of a market guide around B2B customer data platforms around the same time as well. So to your question in terms of how do we position ourselves in a place where, we would be considered strategic, the answer is we didn't really do the strategy to try to get acquired, but we definitely talked about and thought about new category as a way for us to establish kind of a narrative that would make us strategic from a CMO and a buyer perspective.
Right. Okay. And now at Atrium, do you feel like that's sort of a similar playbook that you're deploying here? Because there's like dashboarding, as you mentioned, dashboarding has been around for a long time, but dashboarding is it's lower value, right? It's not as distilled as a sales management tool that's making recommendations. So do you feel like it's a similar playbook that you have here that about ownership of this category?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way we kind of think about it is, yes, the current tools don't necessarily solve the problem. There is a need for kind of sales managers to use a different kind of tool. We do, whether it's a new category or kind of a new subset of another category, we're still kind of looking at that. But the idea here is there is kind of a new way of doing things
Yeah.
And we're, kind of that's what we're focused on is, empowering sales managers with the data they need to improve team performance there. And the thing that so it's not like we're asking sales managers to do something that they wouldn't necessarily be doing. They're trying to use data to have better one-on-ones, to
Right.
increase the reduce the amount of time that it takes to onboard and ramp an employee, the to do proper goal setting, right? It's just that the current tools don't kind of solve that problem. And so that's what we're trying to fix. Where we do think that it is kind of a different category of solutions, but I would say that we're still early in that process.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I guess we're coming up on time here, so I just
Yeah.
want to be respectful of your time. And but one other question I do want to ask is just around, when you're assessing those programs, when you're thinking about which priorities you're going to be focused on. You'd mentioned about looking at the conversion rates and looking at those leading and lagging indicators. One of the things that's really come out in a lot of my discussions is about prioritizing not just programs but hiring and who where you
Mm-hmm.
focus from a hiring perspective. Any thoughts on who you hire first when you first came into Atrium, or where your next
Yeah.
hire is? Like, how do you think about that in terms of growing your team?
Yeah, I mean, so obviously, it's very much in line with, kind of my OKRs or objectives, right, from
Yeah,
a marketing standpoint. And, kind of me and the founders, we kind of jointly figured out like where is it that marketing can add the most value, and that obviously drives a lot of this, right?
right,
And so for us, pipeline is number one, our objective. And there's a variety of different ways to execute on that, but first and foremost we need to make sure we're doing the right amount of outbound,
yeah,
right? And so that meant creating a sales development function,
right,
right? And so that ultimately helped me to answer that question of who's the first kind of person that you'd kind of bring on, if you will.
right,
Second thing is also then the marketing programs that we would run to kind of support that, right, in terms of the content that we need to create, in terms of the emails and so on and so forth. And so program manager is another. Now, if we're in a kind of a unique space where one of the co-founders used to be an ex-product marketer, and so he's also our chief revenue officer, right?
okay,
And so I can rely on him to help out with a lot of the product marketing stuff.
yeah,
If it weren't for that, I would probably have included product marketing as kind of a top 3 hire here as well, right?
right,
And then everything after that just kind of flows based on kind of the different tactics that we're running.
yeah,
I would say the next hire, we haven't done this yet, but is definitely going to be more on the content side. So we can
okay.
help kind of build up that, bolster the content that we already have in place.
I mean, it makes sense given what you did at Lattice and
Yeah.
with the content there and Dun and Bradstreet. Um,
Yeah.
just one last question though, because about your
Yeah.
SDRs though, if you don't mind, one of the things that I find really interesting about having SDRs in marketing, and we do the same, is how much more you're able to hear customer stories or prospect stories rather, and
Mhm.
hear that the challenges that they're facing. Do you have a mechanism to get that info back so that you're able to iterate and tell better stories to prospects?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, first and foremost, like we're back at the office, and
Yeah. Oh yeah.
there's a lot, a good number of folks have actually started coming back to the office.
Yeah.
And so, first mechanism is just, we're all in one room. We're a pretty small company.
Right.
It's invaluable for us to be able to listen in and just overhear sales reps over there having calls, customer success folks having calls with
Yeah.
customers. So that unto itself is a great kind of signal, if you will, that is very advantageous to me as a CMO, is to be able to leverage that insight to create better content, right? To create and improve on the messaging that we would have, and so on and so forth. That's number one. Number two, the SDR team as well as the sales team, We all work really closely together. Like I said, it's a small company, so that feedback loop is consistently active. We work on a rev of the pitch deck. The sales reps, will kind of go out and use the slides, and then a day later, right after they've presented, we'll get the feedback back, and we can kind of improve on the messaging and whatnot there. Right.
Awesome.
So there's a lot, again, the advantage of being at a smaller company where we're all essentially in one room, is you get that real-time feedback that you can use to improve on the messaging, content, CTAs, and so on and so forth.
That's great. Cool. Really enjoyed this conversation. It was great to catch up with you again and to hear about the success at Atrium that you're having.
Awesome. Yeah, great to be here, Peter. Thanks.
That's great. Thanks so much.